BGLU's Power Forum. Today we're talking about the role and the evolution of the in-house lawyer. And we have a fantastic panel for you today. We have Suzanne Butah, who is legal director of Guinness-Ghana Breweries. And we also have Sebolelo Gebhardt, who is from Jacob Holdings. We have Banke Adeyemo, who is of Vantage Infrastructure. We also have Joan Michaels of Aker Energy Limited. And we also have Juliet Manteaw-Kutin, Head of Legal of Anglo Gold Ashanti Ghana. So I'm going to let the panels introduce themselves and tell you a bit about themselves. If you would like to start, please, by telling us a bit about yourself, a bit of background, and why you got into law, or either why you got into, or either why you went in-house. So can we start with Banke, please?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together and the opportunity to talk to people who might be considering law generally and an in-house career as well. I decided to become a lawyer when I was 8 years old. My grandfather was a lawyer and he was educated here in the UK. I'm Nigerian. And in Nigeria, he was where being a lawyer was quite grand, probably still is. And he'd wear the wig and the gown, and it was the fanciest job that I could think of. And it just seemed like the most amazing thing to me at the time. And I just did everything that you had to do in school back then at secondary school in Nigeria, and then even in choosing university subjects to become a lawyer. I studied law in the United States and then moved to the UK a little over 10 years ago. I started my career at Linklaters and then probably moved in-house when I was a 6th year associate. And I moved in-house not directly because I wasn't sure what kind of in-house role I wanted to do, because I had specialized at the time in capital markets, and back then they told you all you could do after being a capital markets practitioner for 6 years was go work at a bank. I just wasn't sure if that was actually the case, so I became a contractor, and I did a couple of contracts at a few different places to try to figure out exactly what type of position I wanted to be doing next and what company I'd like to work at. I worked at the first company for 3.5 years, so I didn't do a very good job of shopping around. But I enjoyed it. I loved my team and I really liked the work I was doing. I then moved to the role that I'm in now, contracted with them for 6 months, and I was asked to stay on as general counsel. And I've now been at my current position for 2.5 years.
Thank you, Banke. How about Suzanne? Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So, Suzanne, how did I decide on a career in law? I like to tell people it's because I had a serious lack of imagination. So much like Banke, around 8 years old, 7 years old, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I think that stemmed, I didn't know any lawyers. I think that basically stemmed from watching far too much TV. And in my time, it was LA Law and that sort of thing. It's later years that people are just like, yeah, Suits. I'm just like, the problem with watching Suits, bit of a sidebar now, is because I know more about the law, I can't watch those shows anymore. But don't let them put you off. They're really good fun. So yes, I studied law all the way through. I did it for LLB. I did it for my master's, and I think as far as going in-house is concerned, I've always been in-house. It's sort of in-house is my natural habitat. My first job, legal job, was as a paralegal in a record company in London. I intended to stay in-house there to train as a solicitor, but things did not align, so I decided to check out other options and managed to get a training contract at Adel Shaw Goddard. So that was my 2 years in private practice, was with them, and on qualification, I moved to Ghana immediately to join Tallow Ghana Limited, which is actually where I met Joan. And I stayed there for 9 years. And 2 years ago, I was given the opportunity to join Guinness Ghana Breweries PLC as their legal director and company secretary. And I jumped at the chance, loved working in oil and gas and in the energy sphere, but it just felt like there was a time for a change, and it's been a big change, but it's been a lot of fun. So that's, yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. And speaking of Joan, would you like to go next, please?
I said, sure, right after my previous supervisor. So Suzanne was my supervisor in Tallow, where I actually started my legal career as a trainee legal advisor, moved on to legal advisor, and then jumped ship to another oil company as head of legal and company secretary at Aker Energy. Education-wise, I have a multidisciplinary background, I like to say, that spans finance, HR, and law. So I bring that kind of broader perspective to the practice of law. I enjoy the oil and gas industry. It's technical, and I'm one that sets up for a challenge. So I like it in that sense. I'm a first-generation lawyer, and so I like to encourage, people in that circumstances to strive for what they really want, I guess, in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you, Joan. How about Juliet?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I didn't really plan to be a lawyer. My first degree was in marketing and psychology from the University of Ghana. But after school, I wasn't sure that I would get employed immediately. So I decided that I would go back to school. At the time, they had just introduced the post-first degree law in University of Ghana, which had been crashed into 2 years. And my father wanted me to read law when I was going to the university. So I thought, okay, maybe I should make my father happy by going to read law now. So that's how I ended up reading law. And having read it, I'm not sure that I would have been better at anything else. In my career, I started in private practice with Banke, Lecture in Ankuma. I did 2 years, but I did mostly corporate law. I did litigation, I did commercial, but I didn't really like litigation. So I stayed in the corporate team for about 1.5 years, and then I moved in-house. At the time, I decided to move in-house because I thought I was quite young in my career and I could take risk at the time. And if I went in-house and I didn't like it, I probably could just jump back quickly into private practice. So I did my first stint with a telco company, and that was about 1.5 years. And then I got an offer to join Anglo Gold Ashanti, and that was in 2009. And I have been here since then. I came in as a senior legal officer, and over the period, I have risen to head the legal department with corporate affairs, and then still as company secretary for the company, as well as 6 subsidiaries. So that is me and my career journey in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And last but not least, Sebolelo.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Suzanne. Good evening, everyone. So similar to Juliet, I didn't know from a young age that I wanted to be a lawyer, something that grew over time. I think my history teacher actually planted it in my mind when I was in high school, I think probably grade 8. And I sort of always had it in my top, let's say, 3 career choices, but didn't really commit to it until after I had finished my first degree. I went to study in London, and I actually first did a degree in English and drama, and then I did a conversion course at BPP. But I would say that along the way, I had many mentors that actually guided me towards this career. And I think it was an excellent choice because it does really fit my personality and it does fit my interests. And many of the people that I look up to are lawyers. So sometimes people know you better than you do. But thankfully, I found my way. And I think also what really helped me was also finding the niche that worked for me. And currently, I'm an investment lawyer, and that's something that I particularly enjoy. So I'd say that those are some of the reasons why I became a lawyer. In terms of studies, I studied in the UK, as I mentioned earlier. And then afterwards, I trained at Norton Rose Fulbright, worked there for a bit, and then moved on to HSF, or Herbert Smith Freehills in Paris. I worked there for a bit. I focused on M&A and financing, and then found my way to Zurich. And that was really a good opportunity for me to switch from private practice to in-house. Firstly, because it just made sense at that point in time, but also because I found a role which I thought would reflect my interest in the sense that it was, you know, an investment company which was family backed and focused on, you know, the sectors that I was interested in, so business services and FMCG, but also gave me an opportunity to learn about not just investments, but also portfolio companies in a way that I couldn't in private practice. So I'd say that would be my motivation for moving in-house.
Thank you very much. So very, very interesting, all of you, very interesting backgrounds. I would say most of you started off in private practice. So in considering that, what are the pros and cons of working in private practice versus in-house? So Banke, would you like to take that question for us, please?
It's a very good question, and it's not the easiest question to answer, I would suggest, but both have their pros and cons indeed. Private practice, I think one of the best things about private practice is the collaborative approach to solving problems, where you are part of a team. And if you have an issue, a question, there's somebody much more senior than you who has probably faced the question before. And you might, depending on what your, how well your firm staffs things, have somebody perhaps more junior to you who can get started on the process, and then you can comment on or fix whatever the final product of the search is. Depending on where you are in-house, you might not have all of those same resources. And even in private practice, even when you don't have a massive team to work on the particular project with, there's always a colleague next door whose office you can go into and discuss the problem and think through it together. Depending on how big the teams are where you are in-house, there are oftentimes, particularly at small companies, that you find yourself alone as the final arbiter of a decision, particularly when you're the general counsel. And it feels riskier, but it is, in the end, an opportunity to use your skills, your talent, and to do really well. On the con side, that being alone sometimes to make a decision can feel like a con, but it isn't necessarily always a con. One pro about being in-house is a little bit of the competitiveness of private practice is gone, and it doesn't feel as though your colleagues are in competition with you for the next promotion or a bonus. But I mean, different places can be very different. I'm not really sure what it would be like at, I don't know, an investment bank or something. And I suppose another really good thing about in-house, not all the time, but sometimes, is that you sometimes find that you do get a better work-life balance.
That's great. Thank you, Banke. So you spoke a bit about the role of an in-house lawyer. So Suzanne, could you tell us a bit more about your typical day? What does that entail?
Yeah, sure. I started scribbling down some notes, and then just kept going and going and going. I think one of the, so just touching on Banke's point about, you know, what we do as in-house counsel, and when you're alone and you don't necessarily have a sector expert like next door, just, you know, the email away, you find that, you know, you're doing a lot. And, you know, especially in this, in a Ghana environment where things are quite hierarchical and there is this, you know, pedestal that lawyers tend to get put on, you know, people tend not to want to move until, has lawyer seen it? Or have you signed off on it? So you tend to get into a lot. So just sort of just pulling on my day-to-day, do cut me off if I've just gone on for too long. So at the start of the week, there would be an exec meeting. So the lead management of the business would get together for an hour just to discuss what's going on right now. It's not a strategy meeting. There are no highfalutin ideas flying around. It's simply what our short-term goals for the week. So for me, that could be something like highlighting a particular contract I'm working on or need feedback from maybe the finance director or the commercial team on. It could be the training that I'm proposing for the week, either for business-wide or for enterprise. It's things like highlighting a particular meeting coming up, whether it's a board meeting or a committee meeting, and just so that everyone has a feel of what's going on. The next few hours of my days are, unsurprisingly, taken up by yet more meetings. It's such as the life of climbing the corporate ladder, is the better you get at your job, the less you do of it and the more you do of other things, and that's mostly sitting in meetings. So from this context, at Diageo, the way we have it set up is I have a number of teams that report into me. So it's legal, COSEC, brand protection, security, and records management. So on any given day, I may be having a catch-up meeting with one of them. So it could be the records manager talking about information to asset inventories, which are basically a list of documents that each team has that are business critical and how they store them, and whether we are complying with what's on the list or whether things need to get rid of, and that we're going through the process of all of that. So that could take half an hour. The next meeting that would be lined up would be something on controls. Now, controls, I'll be honest, is something that I wasn't really familiar with until I got to Diageo. I'm pretty sure in my last job, somebody tried to talk about it, and I just sort of looked at them blankly and said, listen, this all doesn't sound particularly interesting. And also I've got this really important document that I'm working on and drafting. So, but yeah, at this stage, I'm not allowed to do that. And you start to realize that they are the checks and balances that the business has for its processes to make sure it's running properly. For me, that's a range of around anti-bribery and corruption, data protection, anti-money laundering, and competition. So I may be getting a call from somebody in Bangalore who's checking up to make sure that the controls that we've put in place and designed for our gifts and entertainment process are working. So that somebody's put it in the register. If it's above a certain value, the line manager has signed off, and make sure that I'm doing the spot checks to make sure all is well. And if not, that mitigations have been put in place, and I collect the evidence for that and send it off and have a talking to whomever's not done the right thing, or congratulated everyone on following the training superbly. There may be, following that, yet another meeting. Perhaps there's a big strategy meeting going on around a particular new route to consumer that we want to do, and what do we need to put it in place. And so it would be a multidisciplinary meeting across finance and commercial and marketing and logistics and legal to make sure that we have everything hanging together. At some point, there will be a catch-up maybe with my line manager. I have two. There's my MD in Ghana, and then there's a functional lead who sits in London. And then at some point near the end of the day, sometime after tea time, where I've sort of grabbed the last 2 hours of the workday and more besides, I will get around to attending to what I see as the legal work. So there's maybe a contract of a significant value, which needs me to look at. Or there's a piece of litigation that needs reviewing with external counsel. In between that, there will be general ad hoc queries coming from everywhere. And in the Zoom times, whereas before it used to be 5 minutes, just pop your head around the door, Suzanne, what do you think about this? It's, I've put half an hour in your diary. So those things tend to mount up, but there are questions that just kind of generally need a quick answer, or I know what the answer will be in 5 minutes, I'll get back to you. So it tends to be a very varied day, and it could be across a range of issues, from say there may be a disciplinary issue that needs looking at, or some facility documents from one of our bankers needs looking at. So that tends to be a typical day. It's a real mixed bag.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. That sounds all sounds very interesting. I know what you mean about the meetings, lots of meetings with business and the like. And I would imagine you also have meetings with general counsel. So in that vein, what is the typical role of the general counsel? So could Sebolelo take that answer, please?
Yes, and remembering to unmute this time. So I think it's difficult to really define in a short space of time, but I'd say it's a very multifaceted role. So you're no longer just a lawyer. And I think that's part of the reason most people do move in-house, is that you want to move beyond just being a lawyer and contribute more to a business. So I think that's something that you need to think about. But in my case, you know, I've also have to put on a different hat. I have to put on a hat as a manager. I have to put on a hat as an investor. So it's really about sort of combining all those roles and juggling them, let's say. It's learning to be a jack of all trades. And I think this is also a big difference between being in private practice. You know, you can focus on just M&A, you can focus on just financing. In my role, I can't do that. I have to be able to understand everything, every legal issue that comes on my desk. And, you know, I've had to do difficult things like, you know, find a way to dismiss a C-level executive in one of our portfolio companies and work with employment lawyers in different jurisdictions in order to be able to do that, in jurisdictions I've never worked in before, but still being able to understand the legal aspects well enough so that I could explain to our CEO how the process will work and how in the process I can protect the company. Similarly, you know, I've had to deal with some difficult co-investors and had to make sure that the documents that we have, you know, could stand testing in difficult times. And I think last year was such an amazing example of that. I think COVID was one of those years, you know, COVID hitting was one of those years where really we tested a lot of our documents. We tested our financing agreements. We tested our shareholders agreement. We tested so many things that typically would just sort of be something you negotiate at the time. And, you know, most of it is forgotten after that. But I think, you know, with the difficulties of last year, we really had to make sure that all the documents we had worked, and thankfully they did. But I think that's the most important part of my job, is that whatever decision I make, ultimately, when, you know, when difficult times hit, I can stand in front of our management and defend every single decision that we made at the time, which I think is really important part of my job. And also, I think always finding the right solution, because sometimes, you know, you have to balance being a lawyer, but with being pragmatic and putting on, as I said, that investor hat, right? And thinking about what works. You know, you don't want to just be the lawyer that is a good lawyer and finds all the problems, but you also want to be a great lawyer, and that's the lawyer that finds all the solutions. And I think that is the hardest part, again, of transitioning from private practice in-house. It's really changing that mindset, because otherwise, you know, people don't want to come to you because you're the person who just says no all the time. And that brings me really to my next point, which is that you are the legal watchdog of the company, which, you know, is not the most glamorous part of it, because, you know, as I said, you sometimes have to be the gatekeeper. But I think, you know, it's something that you shouldn't forget, because it's really important that you defend and protect your stakeholders in all the documentation and all the decisions that you make. And I think that's really the core of where my role starts. And of course, I would hope that I move beyond that. And I think also another important role that I play is being the interface between management and other people, so counterparties. So it's really being the interface between management and other employees. It's being the interface between management and our portfolio companies, and the same, you know, with management and our co-investors. So, you know, my CEO and head of investments are too busy to deal with every single thing. So they need me to be there to make sure that only the most important and urgent matters come to their desk. And if I'm doing that properly, then they can also do the rest of their job properly. And I think it's also learning from my colleagues and them learning from me. And I think that those are really the key elements of my role, I'd say. Thank you very much.
And how does that differ in a different industry? Banke, how about your role as a GC? How does that differ to what Lelo has just described?
Just from hearing Lelo now, I'm realizing that we basically have the same job, because I'm general counsel on an investment management fund as well. So it doesn't differ that much. I think perhaps the only thing that I would add to that, because she's described a lot of the more interesting aspects of the job, is you find yourself becoming almost the police for the creation of functional adaptive processes and procedures, and making sure that everything that happens at the company is in line with those processes and procedures. And sometimes, particularly when you are in an industry that is innovative and it's exciting, and it's an industry full of brave people who are jumping forward and making decisions, it can be tough to be that person that needs to say, absolutely right, this works, here are solutions, but this is the way that we have to dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that everything that we're doing, we can firmly say, we're happy, it's gone through the right procedures, and we are doing what interests of our clients.
Thank you very much for that. So now if we move on to talk about the evolution of the role. So there's been a lot of talk about standardization and using AI, for instance. Do you think the use of AI and standardization of the role will mean less jobs for lawyers? Can Juliet please take that question?
Thank you, Meena. Every time there's a change in technology or there's a technological shift, there are always concerns about whether there will be job losses, and indeed there will be job losses. With standardization and digitization and the use of AI, definitely some jobs will be eliminated, but not all jobs will be eliminated, including the legal space as well. It is expected that basic work, mundane work, reporting, data collection, basic advice could be replaced by AI, and it is indeed being replaced by AI in different jurisdictions. I understand there are apps that would give you instant advice. There are apps that would give you the outcome of a case by just putting in the basic facts, and you'd get that in like 5 minutes or something. But what it does is that it frees time for more critical work to be done, for work that needs more thinking and more innovation. So, and that is what is expected of the in-house counsel in recent times, where you're not expected to just tell them what the rule book is or say no to everything, but you're supposed to strategize, you're supposed to innovate, you're supposed to help the business grow and facilitate the business. So having these standardization, digitalization, and AI would free you time to do the more critical work of being creative, being innovative, and supporting the business the way you're supposed to. I read an article recently that said that with the advent of AI, knowledge jobs would go away, but wisdom jobs will stay. And what it means is that the lawyer would have to reskill and know more, especially more of the softer skills. How do you connect with the other party? If you're in a negotiation, how do you get the other party to get on your side? Intuition, emotional intelligence, how all those skills become more important as AI and the use of AI increases in the space. It becomes more important for us to reskill and to develop more of the emotional side and the empathic side, so that we become more useful and more relevant in the industry.
Thank you so much. I like that answer, especially the comment about wisdom. I mean, does anyone else on the panel have anything to add on that particular subject? I think it's quite an interesting one and quite topical.
With typical lawyers' arrogance, we had a preview of the questions, and I did discuss this one with my lawyer, who I worked with, and we both went, and then thought about it a bit more. I'm sure that's what a lot of people said before, robots took their jobs. So it's not one to sort of be particularly dismissive of. But for me personally, anything that makes my life easier, I welcome. wholeheartedly. And as you think about the processes that are in place already, worked for a couple of multinationals, and we've always had a large bank of standardized contracts that we've had that you take off the shelf for particular situations. And the bit that you need the law degree and the practice for is when it doesn't quite fit that situation, because everything is different. And it's all very well, it's great. And I didn't become a lawyer to do NDAs every day. That doesn't give me joy. And so to the extent that somebody can put in the parties and the purpose, which is also quite challenging sometimes, and put them in properly and get it signed off, and I don't need to get involved, that's great. It's the bit that we need to get involved is so somebody disclosed this information without getting permission. What do we do now? And so far, the app doesn't tell you. So that's the value add that we bring, and it's that larger thinking, and it's ultimately, as Juliet says, it's around soft skills, because really, if we could all just punch something into a computer and have it align perfectly and both counterparties agree, that would be great. I could watch Netflix all day and be quite happy with my life. But that's never what happens. Everyone has a different view, and it all sort of ends up on the page somehow, somewhere, in a way that maybe doesn't look perfect. Leto talked about looking for the right solution, and the right solution doesn't necessarily mean 100% right. I think one of our old GCs from Tyler, Joan, Graham Martin used to say, look, if you can get 80-20, and sometimes 75-25, and it's being able to judge where that line is what we do a lot of the time. So I think, bring it on. There's no need to have me sort of trawling through disclosure documents looking for one particular word. I'm happy for a computer to do that. Everyone should be. But there's plenty left over for us to do, I believe.
Thank you very much for that. And does anyone else have anything to add? Okay. If not, then we'll move on. I mean, well, given all that we have said about AI and the future of the role, how do you think we stay relevant? What does the in-house lawyer have to do? Could Juliet take that question? I'm sorry, can Joan take that question? Apologies.
Right, sure. I mean, just before I get into the answer of that question, there are a few things I'd like to pick on. The first is that the role can be lonely. What I have found that has worked for me over the past year, especially being in a head role, is having a very reliable external counsel who is on retainer, somebody who's been doing the oil and gas industry, at least in my case, for a while, that you can pick up the phone and bounce ideas off. Being on retainer has been very helpful. So, although it can be lonely, that is a practical way that I have found to deal with that. And then the next thing I would like to pick on before I get into your answer is around the fact that AI is evolving the role, which also means that lawyers have to be more than lawyers as the in-house counsel role evolves. A lawyer has to find a way of adding value to himself or herself, especially in-house, so that she can be a more valuable contributor other than just knowing the black and white letter law. And that ties in directly to the question that you ask in terms of what we can do as in-house counsel to remain relevant. And I do think that question is important because most of the time there is this perception, rightly or wrongly, that in-house counsel are just support staff. There's some truth to that assertion because we are support staff, much like finance or HR or, to the extent that you are providing advice that's tangential to the core business, whether it's producing oil or producing Guinness, you are a support function. But I think the notion behind that question is where I differ, because I think when people say that, the notion is that in-house counsel do not add value or add very little value, which is, from all that's been said, from all the other panelists, I don't see how that can be true. In-house counsel do create value. We do add value and we preserve value, So on the value preservation side, the things Suzanne spoke about control, having your regulatory compliance in place. I'm familiar with a situation where a company was fined over $1 million in fines, if the company had appropriate control measures in place, making sure that employees had the tools to comply with the permitting requirements, that may not have happened. The company would have preserved that value. Preservation of value comes in when we work with external counsel. How do you ensure that the bills are kept low? One of the highest company costs I've seen really relates to legal costs. They can be very high when lawyers are charging $700, $800 pounds an hour. So, especially when you're in a litigation context, you need to work with your external counsel to ensure that the cost mechanism or the fee mechanism is somewhat capped, to a certain value that creates certainty for you and preserves value for the company. In terms of creating and adding value, people who are engaged in-house counsel, mainly what we do is soliciting transactional work. And, to the extent that you come to that work, having an understanding of the law and an intimate knowledge of the business. And that's, that's something special that we bring as in-house counsel, having that intimate understanding of the business and its culture, and being able to use that to structure an optimal transaction is definitely a value addition activity that in-house counsel perform. And so I think that's as the career evolves, and many more people are wanting to go in-house. One of the things I do is career coaching. I speak and I teach as well. So I speak to a lot of young people, and many more people are beginning to consider the idea of going in-house. So I believe that as the space evolves, the things that we need to do is to be more business partners and understand the business. We shouldn't be detached from the business. I'm just a lawyer. I'm just here to check whether you are complying or not complying. That is not going to serve us well going into the future. Becoming business partners, I think some of the part I have done actually, because I went into oil and gas with absolutely no background in oil and gas, but now I speak fluent oil and gas. One of the practical things that I have done in the process, just grab somebody in the technical team. Can we have lunch? Or can we meet for brunch on a Saturday? Just try to get them to proactively try to understand what the business is about. Because that understanding also helps you to give an informed legal decision about how some of these things are done. So yes, I think those are some of the things we can do and should continue to do to stay relevant. And of course, membership of professional bodies. The industry I'm familiar with is oil and gas. I'm a member of what we call the AIPN, the Association of International Petroleum Negotiators. So, as in-house counsel, we have to find these associations and keep up with them. And one last thing, I think as in-house counsel, we are sometimes detached from the profession. I've never attended a legal conference in Ghana, So I think it's important for us to also stay in touch with the broader profession and, understand the trends and what's going on in there. And create the networks, that will help you stay relevant as well.
Thank you very much, Joan. Yes, and even in these times, we've all had to adapt in the last year due to COVID, and we are still adapting as we speak. So if I ask Juliet, how have you found the last year during the COVID times? Have you found any challenges or any opportunities?
Yes, COVID has impacted all of us in many interesting ways. And in our case in particular, we were the first corporate to record a case. And we were in the middle of a major project where all investors looking at us and wondering what the impact of that would be. Were we going to stop the project in the middle of it? So those were major considerations for us. And at the time, it was still very, very new. And we did not even know how it was going to pan out. And a year down the line, we have hindsight that maybe we over-panicked. But yeah, so we had that. And because we're in the middle of a major project, we had supplies coming from overseas that were either being slowed down or because the borders had been closed or because the factory in China or some other place had been shut down, so the parts were not going to come. Suppliers sending through delay notices, notice of force majeure, and all of that. Labor supply. Because we're in the middle of a big project, we were relying on a lot of foreign expertise, and they were stuck. They couldn't travel. How do you get them into the country? So that was very challenging. But in the midst of all of that, it gave us the opportunity to be creative, to find ways to find a solution, to work with the other teams. Like you said, with the in-house counsel, you're pretty much more of a manager than a lawyer, because in my role in managing the COVID pandemic, it had been more of directing and leading and going to talk to the relevant regulators. For example, you need permits to bring workers in, even though the borders are closed. Who do you go to and things like that, you know, rather than forcing a breach of a contract or anything. At that point, really, all you want is to mitigate your losses. All you want is to get the people to come and get the work done, rather than what liquidated damages you would be getting, because it really wouldn't serve any purpose at that point. So that has been our life with COVID, still living it, but with a lot more experience now.
Thank you very, very much for that answer. I just should also stop at this point to remind the audience that if you would like to ask a question, please put your question in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we will answer your question. Thanks very much. So we're just now exploring risks involved in the role of an in-house lawyer. So Banke, how do we mitigate the risks? How does an in-house lawyer do that?
Mitigating the risk for the company is, I mean, obviously a very big part of the role. I mean, some companies, depending on the size of the company that you're in, you might have a completely separate risk team. But even when you do have a separate risk team, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, oftentimes that team would report up to legal, and legal would be in charge of making the decisions from a broader perspective, perhaps, or from what the legal impact perspective could be for the company. And as in-house counsel, half of your job is providing counsel to the board, and some of that counsel will be as to how strategic decisions or day-to-day decisions could affect or could impact legal risk for the company. Your risk is always one of the hats that you're putting on for any type of decision you made, any type of area that you're in of your job. You're looking at risk from an HR perspective when you're creating or negotiating contracts for employees. You're looking at risk from an investment perspective when you are negotiating contracts for investment, or even looking at structures for new investments or new investment ideas. You're thinking about risk even in your own day-to-day job, when you're taking decisions and determining whether or not external counsel is required on a decision-making process. Mitigating risks for your company is not a job that you can take on your own. You need the businesses for the risk analysis in the first place, and you need the businesses and constant communication. You need your compliance team to understand what the regulatory framework is and what the repercussions of certain decisions could be, or the repercussions of falling on the wrong side of certain risks. There are so many different types of risks that I couldn't even begin to cover mitigating all of them, but it is certainly insurance policies. It's having the right processes and procedures in place. It's making sure that your business teams understand the contracts that they are entering into and why. And it's making sure that there remains a constant and consistent open door of communication between you and your executive committee, CEO, or the senior business of your company.
Thank you very much. I suppose within those risks, we have to also look at regulatory risks as well. So Suzanne, how does the GC manage relations with the government and regulators? And by that, we mean complying with rules and remaining up to date with challenges in the industry.
Okay, sure. I'll take a punt at this, and then I'm going to defer to Juliet as well, because I realize that she's also manages the corporate affairs piece. And I think just before we get into it, just the general principle of, I think what's been coming through is how differently everyone is set up. And that's how different the role of an in-house advisor is. So for me, I'm sort of in a subsidiary of a very large corporate that's quite settled, For others, I know Joan will be working with a smaller parent company, but she'll have investor partners that she also has to manage, as do Banke and Lelo. So who you have to interface with changes depending on the role and what's required. And it also just really depends on how you're set up as a business. So the structure where Juliet has, where legal and corporate affairs, which would also include government relations, is very common. I see it everywhere. That hasn't been the case in any of the two multilaterals that I've worked for, where legal is a separate function from corporate affairs. So what I will say is, from a legal perspective, sitting in Guinness, I don't actually do that much interfacing with my government regulators. The piece that I have, which is around the IPC, so Ghana Investment Promotion Corporation, which tend to manage people who bring in trademarks from external places. So, for example, Guinness is a trademark owned by Diageo Island, so we have to license it, and they would approve that piece. So, I would get involved there, to the extent that because Guinness is 60, and the laws around regulations around FMCG are pretty settled. There's not that much conflict that happens. It's very clear, these are the rules, follow them. And if there is any change, it tends to happen, or at policy level or beyond, it tends to be the corporate relations and our government relations manager who will step in to interface on that behalf, because you risk, when you take a lawyer around looking like, do you want to start a fight? Should I bring my lawyer as well? What's going on here? So you have to be very careful how you roll that out. On the other side, and it will be the case in mining, and it will be the case in oil and gas, which I'm sure Joan could speak to, is when you have a new industry, which oil and gas was 10, 11 years ago, and there's new laws coming out, and new policies and new civil society organizations, and all sorts of pressures. Because everything is evolving so fast, you immediately get the lawyers in, because you want to be very clear about, well, what does this mean now? Because you tend to end up having some fairly seismic shifts in what the regulations look like moving forward, especially when you have host nation agreements. So for me, I take a very light touch approach with my regulators. I know who they are. They're very nice people if they've joined the call. But the other thing is also to be mindful of is, as far as keeping up to date with new stuff, this is something I find that external counsel is very useful for, is being able to give you those updates regularly on evolving law in your jurisdiction. I'm English qualified and Ghana qualified, and to the extent that I'm looking at a lot of stuff, I have LexisNexis. Talk about if I'm lonely and I need to talk to external counsel, a lot of the times I'll just read LexisNexis instead. I'll get some great advice and great updates, but we don't have anything as thorough as that in Ghana. And so to that extent, having external counsel who's close to the goings on in Parliament, close to new cases being done at law for employment or with the EPA or whatever, is really very, very helpful. But I think sure that Juliet and Joan also have something to add to this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I interface with regulators a lot, but like you said, it doesn't happen all the time. It is because we're in a particular phase of our work, where we're in the middle of a project, we're restarting a mine, so there were a lot of things to be done. There were a lot of negotiations to be done with government, so you just had to interface with them. But now that we are settling in, that interface is not as often as it used to be, but it's because our industry is very regulated, you need to have a warm relationship with them at all times, and you keep warming the relationship even though you're not seeing them very often. And one of the things, especially in Ghana, which is very important when you are dealing with government and regulators, is to respect them. They change often, but you meet them again. The same people are rolled over all the time. So you need to be respectful when you are dealing with them, be honest and earn their trust, you know, otherwise they could spring surprises on you. You can never know everything that is happening on site, for example. You wouldn't know if the environmental team is having some discharge that you're not aware of, or there's something going on. If you have a good rapport with them, the regulators themselves would hint you sometimes that, look, this is coming your way, if you could fix it before we get there, you know, and stuff like that. So that kind of rapport is very important. And then also internally, you should have a checklist and prompters, you know, because keeping your licenses and permits in place and valid at all times is very important. So you should have, there are several softwares that could prompt you on when your permit is expiring, what time to serve the notice and all of that. We have a system that sends you an email maybe 6 months to the time and keeps prompting you until it's done. And then you take it off that it's done, and then the prompts will stop. So that helps a lot. And then having a checklist on all your requirements, and every now and then just checking with the other departments, because most of the time these permits are not even required for the legal department. It's either HR or mining or geology, and you hardly see those people. So every now and then touching base with these departments and making sure and just checking with them, are your permits in place? When is the next one due renewal and other things? So that is how I do it over here.
Yeah, and if I may, very similar to what Juliet describes as, you know, we actually developed what we call a regulatory contractual compliance tool from scratch, again, using IT and working with your IT department and some external counsel to build that tool for yourself as a proactive means of managing your regulatory compliance risk. Additionally, depending on the industry you are in, you need to watch your big agreements and then the trend in the change in regulation in your industry. Because it may be that you have some rights or obligations in your big or mother agreements, and then the trend in the regulation is going some other way. So you need to be able to monitor and observe those two things in tandem and engage the regulator timeously to preserve your rights, because that can be a real challenge, risk to manage.
Okay, great. Thank you all for your responses there. So we're going to switch it up a little bit and talk more about the role and the differences in the role in various regions. So what is the female lawyer experience in Ghana versus Europe? So for instance, I've heard stories of females just in any organization going to meetings and being asked to serve the men, even though there are people there to do that. So I don't know if anyone has had that kind of experience or can shed more light on the differences. So Suzanne, can we start with you for Europe?
Yeah, no, I reflected on this quite, just like, well, is there stuff that happened that, you know, the patriarchy has made me just like sort of gloss over the sands of time, like, well, that was just normal. But I have to say, for the most part, and it may well be because I've been in-house, and you tend to find a lot of women in-house for various reasons. I've not really experienced anything quite like that. If anything, I would say the one time that I really felt like, not prejudiced, but maybe I really stood out as being a woman, was I was a trainee in London, and we were having a corporate training lunch, and I looked around the table and there was 20 of us, and of the 20, not only was I the only non-Anglo white person there, but I was also the only woman. And the thing that, you know, really, and it was actually the bit about being the only woman there that really caught me off guard. You know, of the entire firm, maybe 5% were non-white, but 50% were women. So how was I the only woman in that room? That really threw me, and I've not experienced that in Ghana. Everywhere I've worked has been with I've worked with strong lawyers. If I think about my female lawyers, if I think about my time with Tullow, the lead lawyers on the other side are for our partners, Cosmos and Anadarko, and GMPC, and I also for Petro SA, were women. You know, so many of the lawyers my age and above in London were women. The lead lawyer at the Ministry of Energy was another woman. So I kept encountering women. At the time I joined, you know, Betty Mould was AG, and then it moved on to another female Attorney General. So I feel like, I'm sure there are horror stories, and maybe it's just me not like opening my eyes and seeing. I have experienced them in other ways, but it had nothing to do with being a lawyer and more to do with just being a woman in a very male environment. But I generally tend to find the law to be, particularly in Ghana, to be quite a female-friendly environment. But I'm sure others have different perspectives.
Does anyone else want to add there? Juliet?
I want to say that I totally agree with Suzanne's description. That's been my own experience. However, having friends who are barristers who do litigation, the story is slightly different in terms of what they experience when they go to court. So there might be some truth to that, but it's not in our context, maybe in the larger context.
I'm sorry, Lelo, you were about to say something. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I think for me, it might be because I'm in more of a male-dominated industry. And I think I'm the only female actually in the team, besides the assistants, who's a woman. And I think because of that, you do sometimes have a little bit of a boys' club. And I actually only had one other colleague who was a woman who's now left. And because of that, we really bonded actually and became good friends, because we really had to support each other on various different things. And it was sort of more microaggressions, I'd say, more than anything else. And for me as well, obviously being also the only Black person, that added to some of those microaggressions, and just having to sort of defend almost my right to be there sometimes as a woman and as a Black person. And, you know, also working in Switzerland with a lot of people who I think probably had not been in such close proximity with someone who is Black for, you know, I don't know, most of their lives. Also meant that, unfortunately, I was in a role where I had to sometimes educate them about what that means, which I don't think is my job, but unfortunately, it became part of my job and role. And I would say I found that when I was in South Africa, I dealt with much less of that. And I think firstly, it's because there are obviously many more Black people there. But also secondly, because there are many more women in these type of roles than I find. It could be, I read a survey once about how in emerging markets, you do find women in more positions of power because of their access to things like childcare and help, etc. So women can have careers beyond, you know, after having a family. Whereas I find in Switzerland, a lot of women either don't go back to work, or if they do, they work 40, 60%, which obviously in our profession, and it's particularly my sector, wouldn't work. And so I think those are some of the things that contribute to people having these type of attitudes, because they're just not used to it. They're not used to seeing women do this kind of job beyond sort of, I mean, I'm not a mother yet, but, you know, beyond sort of being a young junior associate at a law firm. So I think that's probably why I've had more of those issues. Having said that, it still hasn't stopped me from being able to progress in my career. So I think the good thing is that when your work is good enough, people will look past that, because they will need you more than their prejudice. And so I think in many ways, even though I've had to educate people about some of these things, I still feel it hasn't held me back. And I think that's probably the most important thing, even though we shouldn't have to deal with it.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to add on that topic? If not, just in the same vein, So we're talking about the female lawyer and the role in-house versus private practice as well. There has been talk that it's good for female lawyers to move in-house to manage that work-life balance. So what do we think of that? And is there ever a right time to move in-house? Banke, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's very interesting because I think there are nowadays quite a few options for work-life balance, even in private practice. And so there are firms that will let you move down from 5 days a week, which usually translates to 7 days a week, to a little bit less, and you could do 3/4, or you can have flexible arrangements. So it's not cut and dried. It depends on what firm that you're at. And even when you move in-house, there are different sizes of businesses and different types of businesses that you might be a lawyer at, will have a great effect on whether you actually do have work-life balance or not. Moving in-house has traditionally been viewed as providing better work-life balance than law firms, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be the case. So it's always really good to take your time to observe the environment that you're going into and make your decisions based on experiences that others have had, to the extent that you're able to do so before making your choice. I think one reason perhaps that moving in-house is seen as an option that women take very often is that if you look at a lot of private practice businesses, and I'm sure it may be different in Ghana than it is in the UK, in the hiring class at the very bottom for trainees, there's a huge number of women, perhaps a huge number of minorities as well. And as promotions and seniority happens, there's a lot of attrition, and perhaps it's much more, if you look at it from a percentage perspective, proportional women move out and are looking for other options. And as women are moving out and looking for other options, they may often end up being the ones that are looking for these private practice roles because they're at a stage in their career and they're looking for another legal job because there wasn't any room for them at partnership. Which is not to say that any particular law firm or not is doing this, just to say that if women are disproportionately not made partner, then women are going to be disproportionately looking for those in-house roles if they continue in legal practice, and it's not always a work-life balance choice. With the question about whether or not there's a right time to go in-house, it really truly depends on what your needs are. Some people start in-house and remain in-house for their entire careers and they love it. Some people like the competitiveness and the pay structure in private practice and stay there as long as they can until they make a decision later on in their careers or are pushed out of a private practice role. One of the benefits of waiting until you're quite senior to move in-house is that in-house promotions are not lockstep like in private practice. And so perhaps you'd wait until you're senior enough to demand the role and the salary that you'd like. But if you go when you're younger, you might not get the steady every single year promotion that you would get in private practice. You also get very, very good at your job and you develop your confidence and you're able to articulate yourself in front of certain types of groups of people and on certain industrial topics that you might not be able to do when you're very junior in your career. So there's very many reasons to move at different times. But one thing I want to be encouraging to everybody about is I was told when I was a junior lawyer that there was a perfect time to move in-house, and I just don't think that that's the truth. You have to figure out what is best for you and what your desires are for your outcomes, for your career, and talk to various people and figure out what can work in your particular circumstances. People tell you that if you stay too long in private practice, you'll specialize and you won't be able to move. It's just not the case. People tell you that if you move when you're too junior, you won't know what you're doing. And that's not the case either, because you should move into a role where you will have the support and the resources to get your job done regardless of that, and where you're constantly and consistently learning.
And sorry, Banke, thank you so much for that answer. And just, I'd like to stay with you. So you are general counsel. So what was the progression from qualified lawyer to general counsel? And what skills does a GC require?
So I covered this a little bit in my intro, but in reality, I was a private practice lawyer for 6.5 years, specializing in capital markets. And I moved from that to a team at a big corporate where there were 6 of us lawyers. And it was essentially our role to provide legal counsel to a business that was being cut up into very small pieces and sold off. And so it was almost as though all of us were like a tiny little GC at a very small subsidiary of the business and unraveling the business. So I didn't have the GC title, and I was in a team of 6 lawyers, but I got all of the experiences dealing with employment issues, dealing with contracting issues, dealing with M&A, and it was a very generalist role that I jumped to from my very, very, very specialized debt capital markets role. And it gave me great, amazing work experience, great, amazing team experience, people management experience, project management experience. And it was that role, which wasn't a role that I knew to look for, but I got when I was contracting, stayed out for 3.5 years, that I was able to use to transition into a GC role. After I took on that role, every single role I looked for after that had to have the same level of a wider sphere of experiences, a wider sphere of work, interesting work. And so it wasn't just going to be contracting anymore, reviewing contracts. It wasn't going to just be looking at transactions anymore. And so when I stepped into the role that I have now, it was with the idea of finding a small company where I could be the GC and cover all of those areas of their business. I think the other part of your question was the key skills. I say this and I don't really mean it very seriously, but I always tell people that to be a lawyer, you need to learn how to read and write. Once you can read and write, that you're absolutely fine. It's not the case though, but it is, I think, one of the things that you learn how to do well as a lawyer is to read and write in a way that helps other people get the things that they need to get done. And the skills that you learn and you develop in-house that you don't necessarily have to do as much when you're in private practice is helping people articulate to you exactly what it is that they are trying to do, because people have such a hard time doing that. And it's probably one of the most frustrating parts of working in-house. If someone comes into your office, and this never happens, I'm just using a somewhat silly example, and says to you, I would like to divorce my wife. Can you please sort it out? And they walk out. And you're sitting in the office being like, I don't even know who your wife is. And learning how to have people explain to you the parameters of what they need to get done, when they would like it done, how they would like it done, how they would like it done, and that interview skill of building the rest of the skill set that is necessary to get these contracts or these negotiations or these transactions done is perhaps the biggest skill set that you learn and develop a little bit in private practice, but so much more in your everyday experiences as an in-house counsel.
I completely agree with you there. And also relaying the law back to the client, back to the business or whoever you support. I think that's also a very important skill that you hone in on when you work in-house. And Lelo, do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, there's 3 main things. I think the first thing is creating a space for yourself in the environment that you're in. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's something I'd like to repeat because it's quite important. I think probably I did the GC role for about a year, if not 2 years, before I actually was made GC. because I had to almost prove myself that I could do the job before I was able to get the job. And I think part of that was, thankfully, my boss at the time didn't really do much of his work, which in the end worked out for me. I was frustrated at the beginning because I was overwhelmed with having to do so much. But I think in the end, it did work out for me because it made me indispensable to the company. And I think that's the position you really want to be in, because it really helps. And I think, I just started molding myself and creating that role for myself, the GC role, which didn't really exist per se, because even though I did have a boss who was a lawyer, he wasn't really doing the GC role. So it was a good opportunity for me to really create and mold myself into that role, so that when the time was ready, I could ask for it. And I think the other thing was also having important allies within the organization, but also within my network. Firstly, because when you go through trying times, you have people that you can turn to, which is quite important, I think, because there will be trying times. But also because for me, I do feel that if I hadn't had such a good relationship with our head of investments, who really backed me up in many difficult conversations, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the role. Not because I couldn't do it, but because you sometimes need someone to fight the battle with you in order to win it. And I think he really did do that in many important conversations within the organization. The other thing I think is also not just at sort of the senior level, but even at the peer level, it's really important to have people, and I don't mean other lawyers, but also, let's say, in my case, investment team members, who really believe in you and support you and champion you. And I had another colleague of mine, the one I mentioned earlier, who was a female. We sort of got very close, and people really respected her and her opinion within the company. And once she started telling everyone how amazing I was, everyone, really then noticed me, let's put it that way, more than they probably would have before. Of course, I still had to back that up by being amazing, because, it's not just enough for someone to say that, but you also have to, prove it, which I think really, really helped in terms of developing myself into that role. So I think you need it at all levels, sort of that support and ally structure. And also, as I said, network with your friends, because you will need to lean on them when you are having a difficult time. And I think the last thing for me that also really helped was timing and opportunity. My boss left at a particular time, and when that happened, it was a good time for me to then have the conversation and say, look, I have been doing this role for the past 2 years, and I haven't really been able to have the recognition or acknowledgement that I deserve. So again, going back to point one, you have to make yourself indispensable so that when the time and the opportunity arises, you have your arguments in place, you're ready to argue. And then going back to two, those people who need to back you up in order to make your argument stronger are there. So it all works together to sort of help you achieve your goal. So I'd say for me, those are the three things that are really important for being an in-house lawyer, but I think also if it's something you aspire to having a leadership role or general counsel role in the company.
Thank you very much. It's very insightful from both of you. And Joan, you mentioned that you're a career coach. So what advice would you give to any aspiring lawyers that want to work in-house or be general counsel?
Right. So I think the main thing I would like to say from my experience is that do not force yourself to fit into a traditional mold. The traditional mold for the legal profession being get to a law firm, do a few years, move in-house. If you have the right opportunity and the right environment to start in-house and develop yourself in-house, do not hesitate to go for it. I don't feel like I'm missing out on law firm practice. And so under the right circumstances, within a space of less than 5 years post-call, you are heading a legal department. So it's more of finding the right opportunity and applying yourself and not just trying to, fit into a mold. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any advice for anyone that wants to work in-house or be a GC in the future?
Yeah, I would say that being in-house is very empowering, especially for women. And if you find yourself in the right industry, it pays well as well. So it gives you some very good job security. So in the right industry, and you would make some good money. So it's good to consider it even at the very early stages of your career. But one of the most important things, though, is to have your own personal standards, your own personal values, in all of this. You know, set your standards, don't accept mediocrity, work harder, because you would most of the time find yourself as the only lawyer. So whatever you say, people will accept it as the law because they don't know. And you could just slip into mediocrity because nobody would ever challenge you. But you need to have your own personal standards and work harder to improve yourself. And you need to have your own values, stick true to them as well.
That's great.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, sure.
I would agree that completely. I think that a lot of times as a lawyer, you become very addicted to being in a cohort. You were in a classroom and you were one of the best students in your classroom. You went to law school, you were with a bunch of people at the same time. You all took the bar exam at the same time and you're in these groups. And you kind of keep checking in with each other and everybody's checking where they are at what law firm and which law firm did this person get into and which law firm does this other person get into and who made partner and who didn't make partner and what is doing now. And then even when you're thinking about going in-house, you're thinking about you have to go to these top 3 name brand companies because you went to the top 3 name brand schools or you went to the top 3 name brand law firm, and you have to let go of that. And like Joan and Juliet have already covered, make your own career for yourself based on what your own needs and your own requirements are and what you want your life to look at. And I don't think you should get caught up in this is the only way or the traditional way to get things done. And you don't have to be at the same company for 30, 40 years. You can go to this company for 2 to 3 years and switch to this company for 2 to 3 years. Be sensible, of course, because depending on what kind of environment we're in throughout the world, it might be hard or difficult to get a job or make a change. But keep up to date with your skills, keep up to date with your education. It doesn't have to be like focused solely on law. You can get an MBA, you can get a CFA, you can look at whatever the accounting requirements are in the jurisdiction that you operate in, and just keep yourself as valuable to senior leadership, senior business as you possibly can. Be competitive, be valuable, but be adaptive and be ready to move to different types of companies and try out different things.
Just something that I experienced recently. It's also that as lawyers, we need to learn management tools and ways of presentation. We recently needed some information from a law firm, and we got a spreadsheet or calendar of court events when all senior management wanted to see was like one PowerPoint, pictorially representing the key milestones. And then we got this big spreadsheet. So I had to go back to the law firm and say, can you use this template to just give us a one, snapshot of the milestones? So I think as lawyers, we get, bogged down into detail. So we need to learn the skill of presenting the most important information to management. They don't have information to read all the details. Even legal opinion, can you put it in a PowerPoint that is catchy and snappy that management can look at the main issues in 2-3 minutes? I find that skill is very important.
So look, I echo everything everyone said. As far as the point about moving in-house, I come back to the point about everyone is different. Many companies are very different. So there's a whole smorgasbord of different options out there. You want to work by yourself, you want to work in a large team. At one point, Shell had 900 lawyers. That on its own would be one of like the top 10 or 20 biggest law firms in the world. Are you interested in just doing sort of generalist work, or do you want to really specialize? If you love doing intellectual property, there's a specialist role in many companies where you can just do IP. You don't have to stay in private practice if that's what you want. Is it a lifestyle choice? For Diageo, we offer 6 months maternity leave, and in Ghana, the sort of standard is about sort of 3 months, and then you tack on leave. So that may be something that a woman may be attracted to. But we've also started offering paternity leave, and these are things that people start to play with in their mind. I think ultimately, wherever you go, the most important thing is to be interested in what you are doing. And it could be maybe the law part for you is now actually the least interesting part of it, but the most interesting thing is what the company actually does. And it's about showing, because especially when you're relating to your clients, you want to be able to show you care. Joan talked about, going out with the technical guys to talk about, umbilicals and risers and what have you, and all the widgets, which, I'm not a STEM person. So this is all just like, oh, I'm not sure. But like, you show them you care, you show them you're interested, you're able to translate that into your work, into your soft skills and how you relate to them. I love nothing more than just walking into the marketing department and just like saying, yeah, so what's this new innovation? Who's this thing? And, having a long talk with them about that. And as a result, if they have issues, they come and talk to me, and they come and talk to me ahead of the time, as opposed to when it's a problem. But mostly it gives me satisfaction because like I enjoy my work environment, and that's where I am. If, you don't enjoy private practice, well, maybe you enjoy your work area, but you don't enjoy if you're somewhere where you're doing sort of 80, 90 hours a week and having to like chase your billables, and you want to just like, focus on enjoying your work, maybe there is another way of doing it. I've been reading with great interest about these Goldman Sachs kids who've just been sort of rebelling slightly over the past few weeks, because in a way that was very much the case when I was their age. That was what was expected, and now people have different expectations for themselves. They're like, do I have to do this? And the question, the answer they're coming back quite firmly with is no. How these other guys respond, I'm not sure. But ultimately, you spend more hours a day working and with your colleagues than you do awake or with your family and friends. So please, for the love of God, do it with somewhere that you enjoy.
I completely agree with that. And yes, it is interesting. We've all done the hours, I can imagine. But there is definitely a different expectation amongst people entering the job market right now. So just to remind the audience, so just if you have any questions, please send it to the chat. And for the panel, anyone can take this. What are the 3 legal challenges that you have faced in business? Does anyone want to take that question?
Sorry, what was the question again, Meena?
What are the 3 biggest legal challenges you've ever faced in your current role or previous role?
For me, it was stabilization, and stabilization. Those 2 natural resources is basically it's this classic tension between what takes precedence. Is it the, help me with the Latin, Joan, Juliet, Pancta Savanta, or does a country have a right to change the rules, which therefore changes your contract? And anytime you get into a long-term contract, which 25, 30, 40 years, this is something that comes up. And that was just a tension. Tension can be good. Sometimes it can be a bit destructive, but that was something that followed me around for many, many years. I didn't resolve it.
Yeah. In my case, we've had, I think, and it's peculiar to our industry, the challenge of illegal mining. We had a major one some years back, 2016, a very major one. We had to go into arbitration, take governments to arbitration, which was very challenging, because at the same time we're trying to take government to arbitration, or we are taking government to arbitration, we wanted them to give us tax concessions and stabilization and all of that. So that was a very tricky time, fighting and being friendly with the same people. That was a big challenge. Of course, the arbitration itself was new for me in my career. We had to do it at the World Bank exit, and going through that process, eventually we had to drop the arbitration. I didn't get to appear before the World Bank panel, which was very disappointing, but we had the full experience, wrote our submissions and everything. And that was an eye-opener. And at the same time, it taught me to be professional, especially dealing with the regulators, taught me to be professional and discuss the things that we needed to discuss as a business without them feeling disrespected because we were in court with them fighting. But some of the issues got quite personal, and I had to learn to separate the two. And that was a big challenge and a big experience as well, and a turning point in my career.
I think one thing I would like to add, speaking about arbitration, Suzanne, the border disputes, the Ivorian border dispute was one of those big things that we experienced. But away from that, an area of potential challenge that as the profession evolves or as the practice evolves, in-house counsel needs to become more aware of, not that I've experienced it yet, but is this whole professional ethics conflict, and it's more pronounced for in-house counsel, has the potential to be more pronounced for in-house counsel because you have just one client, that's the organization. And as other speakers have said, you are the watchdog and you're the gatekeeper. And as I've already said, you're also supposed to be a business partner. So walking that line of maintaining your autonomy, your values, and also being the watchdog and calling out misconduct when you see it can be conflicting and can leave you in a state of, some form of, cognitive dissonance or whatever it is. But you need to be aware of that real tension if you want to move in-house, and how you can manage having your loyalty to your client and representing them zealously as a professional rules will tell you, and also being able to maintain your duty to the profession, the reputation of the profession, ensuring justice and all of that. Walking that line has the potential of being very conflicting and tight. So it's an area of potential challenge that we should be aware of as in-house counsel. In North America, there are special rules, additional special rules for in-house counsel to observe in this regard, and none in our jurisdiction. So as it evolves, hopefully, we'll see the regulators for the profession coming up with some rules that can serve as a guide, should you find yourself in such difficult ethics situations.
Just to quickly add something from finance perspective, the last thing you want to hear as in-house counsel on the finance side is that there is a legal issue. We don't want any legal issues. Bring me your contract issues, bring me regulatory environments that we need to navigate properly, but not impossible, but very rarely, if you have robust risk management, compliance and procedural framework in place, do you actually come across an actual legal issue. And it's sleepless nights, too much stress. It's the last thing you ever want to see.
Thank you all for that. Is there anyone that wants to add anything on that point?
Maybe I should add something, since I think everyone's added a different perspective as well. I think for me, I mentioned earlier that the COVID environment has been a breeding ground for testing documentation, given that so many things, unexpected things happened at once. So I'd say some of the things were, as I said, having to terminate, very senior employees that you worked with very closely, and having to find strategies around that. I found that quite difficult for me, actually, because, the soft part of our job or being an employee is the relationships that you have. And, when you have to deal with that, it can be conflicting and quite difficult. So that was a difficult moment. And I think also having to navigate that, just even as a person, knowing how difficult it is to lose, your job, etc., and having to negotiate sort of, the value of their shares in the incentive scheme, knowing that the company's value has gone down. So you're not going to give them the real fair market value that you typically would in a different situation. So I think navigating all of those things, but still trying to protect the company, knowing that your role is first and foremost to protect the company, I think was quite a difficult thing for me. Similarly, when companies are doing well, you and your co-investors tend to agree on everything. But the moment when things aren't going as well, the value of the company starts going down, then your co-investors, especially if you're a majority shareholder, as we often are, in my case, look at you differently. They start pointing fingers at why did you do it this way instead of that way, whereas a few months ago they were telling you how excellent you're doing. And I think that also means looking at the documentation again, seeing what your co-investors can do to block your decisions, etc. And that comes with, I think as Banke said, getting, emails at all hours of the morning from your CEO asking you questions on the shareholders agreement or on the employment agreement, and, waking up sort of with this fear of how I'm going to answer this, and sort of looking quickly at the documents, trying to call the external lawyer if you can reach them before they wake up, if they're in a different jurisdiction, which sometimes happens. And sometimes just having to answer that and just hope that it's the right answer. And I think all of those things, happened almost all at once because of COVID, whereas before, I think, it's something that wouldn't really have typically happened at the same time. So I think those are some of the challenges that you have to deal with really in our role, and sometimes all at once.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think at this point we can turn to some questions from our audience. So first of all, I'd like to say that our audience have sent some very positive comments. So thank you all again for sharing your experiences. They're enjoying the event, so thank you very much. We have a question, and I suppose the answer varies according to which organization you're talking about. How many in-house lawyers should a company have? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll take that. I think that it depends on the size of the company and the needs of the company. Our company has moved from having like a whole team of about 20 lawyers to a point where I was the only one to now a team of 3 lawyers. So depending on the stage that the company is in, or the needs of the company, having a small legal department or a big legal department may be determined. However, the smaller the team, the better, because as we've said earlier, the legal department is often seen as a support service. So when there's crisis and they need to cut, they tend to cut the support services first. So it's usually better to keep the team at a good size. The smaller, the better, and just adding value, so that when there's a shake-up, you don't get shaken too often.
Thank you very much. And for the panel, just generally, do you find that you are going to external counsel less or more in your roles?
I'm sorry, it's just everything we preface with, it depends.
Yes.
For me, knock on wood, I don't have any sort of big sort of existential legal crises so far at work at Guinness. So generally you work with the rule of, look, what's the work I can't do? And is it because of technical expertise or is it because of time? So for a perfect example of maybe technical expertise and time is litigation. I simply don't have time to go to court every day to go and seek a stay or see what's happening with such and such application and what have you. And the judge comes and says, actually, do you know what, I'm on holiday, let's go come back. If I was doing that, I wouldn't have time to do anything else. If we're working on, say, a particularly complex transaction, and it's nothing much, but like certainly in oil and gas, we had some pretty sort of funky looking gas sales agreements that I had to deal with. Despite the fact that I do consider myself an oil and gas lawyer, I needed external counsel to come in because I needed a 20-pound gorilla to handle it. I needed somebody with 20 years experience as opposed to 5, and also had all the time of the day to work these documents and turn them around and take the calls at 12 a.m. And it's the ones that your commercial colleagues agree around 10 p.m. Okay, so we'll do this. And then they look at the lawyers and say, so you'll have that ready by 9 a.m.? I need somebody to help me with that. And so that's when I would go out to external counsel. And then the other bit is, and I think this was maybe something that was earlier that I wanted to sort of draw attention to, one of the differences between private practice and being in-house is with private practice, eventually you start chasing invoices because you're there, you are the business, the money is coming in for your services, as opposed to being in-house where, quite frankly, I'm being chased for invoices, one, but two, I'm managing my budget. So it's not a simple math. There may well be things where I'm just like, actually, I really would love external counsel to have a look at this. But you look at your budget for the year, and like, we'll manage this. So that's my perspective.
I agree with you completely, Susanna. I just add that the one other area where I look to external counsel is when I take a look at the risk of the transaction or the contract that I'm looking at, and evaluate what that transaction or what that contract is worth to the company, and consider whether or not an external counsel's insurance policy is required as backup should anything go wrong.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to add to there? No? Sorry, we'll take another question from the chat. So one question we have, I'll have to read this one out. So the question states, would you say that legal risk management should be dealt with by the legal advisors, risk managers, and/or compliance officer only, or should the whole organization be aware of the legal risk involved in the day-to-day running of the organization? So anyone can take that question.
I think the management of the business's risk should be a joint effort because the risk will be coming from different areas and will be understood differently by those areas. However, there has to be a key point, one person who is in charge of it. More in my experience, I found that it either sits with legal or it sits with commercial, who are the people coordinating the risk. But there's generally a risk committee that has, people from these various departments that the question has mentioned sitting on the compliance, could be the technical teams, it could be government risk and all of that. So they're all on that risk, and then they have a big risk register. They have this criteria of whether the risk is yellow, green, or red, depending on the level of the risk, what the mitigation actions have been, and whether there's any residual risk. So I guess the essence of my answer is that it's a joint effort that generally tends to be led by either legal or the commercial function. And yes, the risk will be like the entire business.
Just a quick one. It's important how you define legal risk. So just because a risk is somewhere in a contract doesn't make it a legal risk. If somebody is exchanging widgets in its basic form, like I sell you beer, you pay me, and we have that in a contract, if that person doesn't pay, that's a commercial risk. It's not a legal one. I find that people are very quick to just pass on risks and say, this feels legal. I'm like, this really isn't. And then that becomes a whole thing. So yeah, being in-house, you tend to be a repository of things that people don't want to deal with sometimes. So you have to learn how to push it back out.
Thank you very much. We also have a question from a future summer intern. They were wondering if any of the panelists have a summer internship program at the organization that students can apply to.
I think this is probably a good time, without like stealing time, to plug 100 Black interns. I don't know that everyone on this call is necessarily Black, but a lot of people's organizations are signed on to it, and a lot of people's organizations who wouldn't traditionally have their own internship program, particularly the smaller organizations or smaller teams in an organization, would perhaps be signed on to take interns from an effort like that.
Thank you, Banke.
Unfortunately, I don't have one, but it is something after this call. It's something worth having a discussion with my HR department about. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, we also don't really have one, but having said that, I think I would advise people to always try, write to the General Counsel or head of legal at whichever organization you might be interested in, and ask them if they would be willing to take on. It might not be a month or so, but even if it's just sort of a week of, call it job shadowing or whatever it may be, that is always, I think, very helpful. And I would advise that you're really proactive. But I also just wanted to tag on quickly to the last conversation we had about balancing the risk, which is a really interesting one because, I think firstly we discussed a little bit about external counsel, internal counsel risk, but also a little bit about sort of investment team and in my case, investment team and legal risk. And I think the most important thing is that whatever decision is made, the decision is something that is backed by everyone, because what you don't want, especially internally, is people pointing fingers when something goes wrong. And I think if that decision is something that the investment team can live with, or you can live with, it really changes, the dynamic. And sometimes when I'm getting a lot of pushback from the team, I always say, I always say, you make the decision and I will support what you say. But I always record the fact that I had a differing opinion in case needed, which I advise most people to do. But so far, because we've always been on the same page, because it's really a decision we like to take together, it's never come to that. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Lelo. A very good point also about audit trail. I think that's very important, working in-house or in private practice. And so thank you for that.
Sorry,
Sure.
Question. I think my HR director is on the call, and I think she would have me say this, that Accra Energy does have an internship policy. We, over the years, taken a number of interns, and so, but it's very competitive, and it's, so you need to make sure that your application is watertight. And just go on the Accra Energy website and see, the application process and put in an application to be an intern. That's our way of contributing to developing, oil and gas talent for Ghana. So yes, we do.
That's fantastic. Is that only open to certain schools or certain regions, or is that a global initiative?
It's open to anyone who has appropriate qualifications, not to any particular schools.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. We have another question. How do you provide personal development to the junior members in your team? So anyone can take that question if relevant.
I have my team here and they are looking at me. I give them a lot of hard work to do. But more importantly, I make them own their own personal development. So we talk about it. What do you want to do? And we work towards it. So every year we have what we call the individual development plan, and we update it and we make sure that the trainings that are scheduled for a particular year, you go through them. And then when you go through the training and you come back, you are supposed to take the whole team to whatever you've learned. So it doesn't make going for training very attractive, but we let you go through that as well. And then whatever I am studying as part of my own personal development, I try to share with them. So currently, for example, I personally decided that I wanted to do a 1-week rotation with each of the technical departments on site. And when I'm going, I go with everyone. So we started with geology and we spent a whole week with geology teaching us rocks and everything, going underground and going to that say lab, and everybody learned it. And then we discuss it amongst ourselves. And then the next one will go for mining and we'll do all the rotation. I do it with them so that we are all on the same page. So that's how I handle my team.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And do you mind me asking, how big is your team?
Currently we are 4, and it's an all-female team, proudly so.
Oh, fantastic. That's good to hear.
We need a discussion about unconscious bias in hiring at some point.
positive discrimination. So that's fantastic. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Sure. So for my team, so I've got a team of two. So I've got my COSAC administrator, sort of double hats as team assistant, and I keep referring to her as my lawyer, Sandra. Yeah, they're a great pair. And I think what we find is I'm a big believer in learning by doing. And so what we find is we have and that's the nice thing about being in-house is there's such a broad scope of work to do. That you will come across something and you will learn how to do it. The benefit of also working with somewhere like Diageo is it's such a huge organization. It takes its personal development very seriously. So our appraisal system is the P4G system, where you sort of slot in your goals, agree with them, and as a line manager, it is your job to make sure that those goals, the tools are put in place or projects are put in place to have people meet those personal goals. As well as just on the site, I have this amazing array of training tools and videos and PowerPoints and sessions with external law firms from across the world that you can log into and keep your skills up to date. We try as much as possible to, something we've been trying to do is doing cross-jurisdictional work. So even if it is a supply chain or procurement contract that you've done in Ghana, try doing it in Nigeria, try doing it in Ethiopia, try doing it in Canada, just to work with different people. Because I always find that every time you work with somebody else, even if it's doing the same sort of thing, you learn something else. Either it's a different way of work or a different perspective, and through that you grow and you learn and you become better. So yeah, that's kind of how we approach it in my team.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Does anyone have anything to add? No? Okay, if not, we're almost at the end of this discussion. So I would like to go to each panelist. And can you please provide key takeaways for any aspiring solicitors, anyone looking to move in-house, to work as a GC, or any other key takeaways that you think would be important for our varied audience? So Banke, you're at the top of my screen, so can you go first, please?
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. I think I'll just reiterate some of what has already been said by the other panelists as well. It's often very difficult to get started, and it's often very difficult to find the right position, the right job, exactly when you want it, and for it to be the most brilliant job in the world, and that's in any industry. So for your first job, your second job, it might not be the perfect fit for you. And sometimes you're just there to learn, or you're just there to qualify, whatever the case may be. But as you grow and as you develop, don't just get comfortable in an environment because it pays well and that's what everybody else is doing. If you have the talent, if you have the passion for it and you are interested, go out and look for the role that fits into your personality and a role that you would be happier at, doing work that you love. It's not always going to be the case, but I think Suzanne said this earlier. If you are completely unhappy and you can't see anybody ahead of you that you admire or whose shoes you want to be in, maybe take a look around and develop your skill set. If it means moving out, move out, and take the next step, take a risk, look for something better.
I like that. Thank you very much, Banke. And Juliet, you're next on my screen.
Thank you. Say that the legal profession is a very empowering profession, and done well, it's also very good in terms of giving financial security, but it all depends on how well you do it. And it's important as a lawyer, and non-negotiable is to know your law at all times, because that's what you are, and that's what that's the value you bring to the table. So you should know your law. And then integrity is very important. Just make sure that you stay true to yourself, true to your values, and respectful and humble at all times. And you should be successful at it.
Thank you very much, Juliet. I like the point about humility. I think that's very important. Okay, Suzanne, you're next on my screen.
Great. I think so. Just it's almost like a key takeaway. We were talking about what's the right time to move in houses, and we just said like it's up to you to decide. There's a particular color on this because when I was in the UK, I always felt that certainly when I was qualifying, there was a perception that if you moved in-house, it was because you couldn't hack it at a private practice firm. I don't know that this is the case in Ghana, so it's a very different experience. You choose to move in-house when it's right for you and pick the right company. Interestingly, the new incoming general counsel for Diageo is a chap called Tom Shropshire, who is a Linklaters guy. He was most recently going to be running to be the senior managing partner. I'm sure he did some secondments in-house, but he was a private practice guy through and through. And he's come in to join one of the 10 biggest companies on the FTSE at the very top. Now, some will be like, well, he left it a bit too late, but it's never too early or too late. Identify the companies that you want to work for. Have a look at their value sets. I think this is something that's become more and more important to me as time has gone on, is I look at the values that the company espouses. I'm like, is this something that is meaningful to me? Is this something that I can get behind? And is this something that they demonstrate? Because in there you have a shared culture, and it's whether you want to be a part of that culture for 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and then drive towards that. And just find your happy place. That's all I can say. In this year of COVID, or years of COVID, I think that's the thing that's been most important is get something that supports your well-being, gives you satisfaction. If that's in the law, in private practice, in-house, doing knitting, whatever, find it, pursue it, be happy.
That's great. Very good points there. Thank you very much. Joan, would you like to take that as well, please?
Sure. I think Suzanne reiterated exactly what I was going to say. I was going to use the phrase, do it on your own terms. So, do what works for you, your personal circumstances, your background and everything. Do it on your own terms. And also find the right support. One of the things that's really worked for me is getting the right people to hold my hand and open doors for me. So network appropriately. And then also know your staff, because when you even have the right people to open the doors for you, they can't spend their currency on someone they can't stand behind. And they can stand behind you if your attitude and work is right. So for me, those are the three things.
Thank you very much. And Lelo, please, would you like to conclude?
Sure. I think listening to the ladies, sort of 4 Ps, as I'd like to call them, came to my mind. I think the first thing is to plan. So plan your career, plan what you want it to look like, have an idea where you're going in your career, but be prepared for deviations, because there will be deviations along the way. Things won't always work out the way that you expect or the way that you want, but if you have a plan, then it can still keep you on track and give you sort of that comfort that you might need during those times. Then I'd say, secondly, pursue it. Pursue the plan, pursue your dreams, pursue your goals. Don't just sort of leave it there at the plan stage, move past that, because I think that's absolutely important, having a strategy and sort of working towards it. And then I'd say the third, to protect yourself. We talked a lot about protecting the company and legal watchdog and all of those things, a gatekeeper. But don't just do it for the company, do it for yourself, do it for your career, do it for your own personal benefit as well. We spoke a little bit about work-life balance. This is something that even for in-house lawyers is becoming more and more difficult depending on where you work. So just protect yourself as well. It's not always just about the company, but it's also about you. But also, in the same way that I said earlier, you know, if you make decisions and you're able to defend them, make sure you also protect yourself, because your reputation is almost everything, especially in small markets. So make sure that you always have something to back you up and protect you if you ever need it. So be smart about it as well. And then I'd say the last and probably the most important thing is passion. Have a passion for what you do. Love what you do, because you're going to be spending, I think Suzanne said it earlier, hours and hours in the office more than at home. So if you don't love what you do, you can't live a life of joy. And I think actually it's going to make it even harder to progress in your career if you don't have that. So whether it's finding the right role, whether it's finding the right niche, whether it's finding the right, you know, colleagues, do it, because passion is, I think, what will take you further than anything else.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. A good point to end on. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has attended this session. It's been very insightful. I'm sure you can all agree. Thank you very much to all the panelists for your insights there and for your advice to our aspiring solicitors. Please reach out to us, connect with us on social media, BGLU. Apologies if we didn't get to any of your questions, but hopefully perhaps we'll have a part 2 of this event. So thank you very much again for joining, and have a good evening or good afternoon wherever you are. Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.